Live, maybe? Yeah. Hi, everyone. What's up, Greg? Good to see you. We are talking John chapter 1 today, and we still have another minute. So, I'm going to stay with my guitar for just a little longer. Wait for a couple other people to show up. Shouldn't say it that way. Waiting for a couple more minutes for it to be 5 o'clock. 5 o'clock exactly. 8 o'clock exactly. Today, we are talking about John chapter 1 in Badass Bible. We've been looking at the beginning stories and wanted to specifically look at how each gospel is beginning their story. So during the Christmas time, we normally hear Matthew and Luke and their Christmas tales. And then last week we had Mark's opening story. We've been spending a few weeks with, which is just this insane thing. The fully grown human male Jesus gets out, shows up. Shouldn't say male, definitely human. Jesus shows up and, sorry, and I also wanted to get a little auto switch on. Oh man, there's a lot of things to do for live. So anyways, we're going to hear from John's first chapter. So we have Matthew and Luke, who both give stories of Jesus' birth and sometimes genealogies, lots of interesting specific parts about it. Mark, fully grown Jesus, shows up at the Jordan River. What up, John? Let's get baptized. John the Baptist. He gets baptized by John the Baptist. Who would have thought? And finally, we get to the Gospel of John and the opening there. Before we hear the story, I encourage you to get some candles maybe in your space to be able to hear kind of, hopefully. I like to have, this is from my local Mercado, San Martin de Porres, and I don't know. I like to have some kind of, I like to be able to see something, feel something, smell something. What up, Gregory? What up, Jenny? I don't know what that emoticon means. I'm not going to pay attention. This is a story from John. In the beginning was Halagas, the Word. And the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The Word was with God in the beginning, and through the Word, everything came into being. And without the Word, not one thing came into being. And what came into being through Halagos was Zoe, life. And the life was the light for everyone. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Now, there was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify to the light. He himself wasn't the light, but he came to testify concerning the light. The true light, which enlightens everyone, was coming into the world. And the Word became flesh and lived among us. We've seen this glory like a parent's only child, full of grace and truth. We've been hearing a lot about John the Baptizer as well. Very good Advent theme. I love John in John's Gospel. But it's important to remember the context of this Gospel. Mark is probably the earliest that was written. And even Mark is removed from the time of Jesus by at least a generation. Right? So I like to imagine each of the gospel storytellers in their own community. And Mark's community, they may have had people in that community who knew Jesus. But Jesus wasn't alive, and he hadn't been alive for a while. After his resurrection, his ascension, the early Christians, right? They're trying to make sense of that. Paul wrote before any of the gospel writers. The Apostle Paul was probably closer historically to Jesus of Nazareth. And so to get to the Gospels, it's like we have to take a little bit of time. Let the story stew, simmer. And then when it comes back up again, we get Mark's Gospel. And then Matthew and Luke probably looking at Mark, and maybe this guy named Q. And then we get John. John is probably another 40, 50 years after Mark. So again, several decades removed from Mark, who was already removed from Jesus, right? So I find it fascinating that Mark's story, the earliest story, starts with Jesus as a full-grown man in the wilderness. Matthew and Luke, a little bit later, close by, they give us the birth narratives. Then John, much later on, into the 2nd century of the Common Era, John gives us this fascinating portrayal of Jesus. And the beginning for John starts before anything else. So if Matthew gives us a genealogy to get a little bit ahead of Jesus, John gives us the world, the universe, the cosmos. Here, the beginning, which is supposed to train our ear for Genesis chapter 1, right? In the beginning. But here we have was the Word, halagos. John comes on a little bit later, but really the John the Baptist. But John's gospel starts in this almost metaphysical, mystical way to remind us, and maybe to correct the first 3 gospels and say Jesus was also beyond human comprehension. And you might notice in a lot of John's stories, Jesus seems to know everything that's about to happen before it happens. It's very frustrating to tell stories like the washing of the feet when you have to stop every 4 or 5 words for Jesus, knowing that he had come from God and was going to God, got up from the table, things like that. He's kind of all-knowing in a very annoying way. All-knowing in an annoying way. That's John for us. And John always comes up. For those, like in our church, in my community, we listen to the 3 gospels in rotation. John is separate, not one of the so-called synoptics. John gets kind of float above. As much as I give crap for John and some of the stories, some of the best resurrection stories are in John. I love John a lot, and obviously I've learned the first chapter as well. I've spent a lot of time with John. I'm just wondering in terms of Advent, what this beginning has to tell us as people who try to follow Jesus, those of us who are waiting right now in this season. And it gets harder and harder as we get closer to Christmas to live in Advent, to wait intentionally, to wait with expectation. For John, the start of the world, you're waiting a long time before we get to the story of Jesus. John takes almost an entire chapter to lay out the world in which the Word became flesh, right? And lived among us. For John, it's the incarnation. And it's just fascinating to spend time with that gospel, especially considering that there were generations of Christians who lived and died without ever knowing John's gospel. It hadn't even been written yet, right? And even once it was written in the early centuries of the movement, difficult to get communication around. Not everybody had every gospel. I agree with David Rhodes, who wrote a fantastic book called The Challenge of Diversity, that the diversity might be a challenge of like how the four gospels tell us four entirely different stories about Jesus, but that it can also be a strength to recognize and value specific communities who found things, told stories about Jesus that led into this gospel, this story of Jesus. And the fact that we have four of them and not just one shows that the early Christian community was open to differing interpretations, different ways to see the world, different ways to encounter Jesus even. That's something 21st century Christians could learn something from, I think. Once you get done with the first chapter of John, the second chapter goes into the wedding at Cana, which is it's a specifically John story, but it gives an image of Jesus that not a lot of us spend a lot of time with, or that we don't get to see often. A Jesus who is attending a party and makes sure that party keeps going. For John, everything matters that people, for John's gospel, that people believe in Jesus. This has often been used as an exclusionary thing, and if we want to get on the faults of John's gospel, absolutely the anti-Semitism needs a bookmark in the whole Passion narrative. And John gives us different ways of thinking. And sometimes that's hard to engage. And it's really hard to spend a lot of time in John's gospel in general. But I think this first chapter is powerful, and it fills in the rest of Jesus's birth narrative, starting with the creation of the cosmos, basically. Anyways, I wanted to hit these up. Hello, Gregory and Miss Keisha. Oh my gosh, lots of you. Good to see you. Again, this is Badass Bible, just 10, 15 minutes, spending some time in the Bible, the general Christian season that we're in, spending some time in Holy Scripture. I love it.